Lines were sketched on paper in a quiet room, but their impact would echo for generations. No public debate, no voices from the land itself, just a handful of officials working behind closed doors during one of the biggest wars in history. What they decided would later turn into borders, nations, and conflicts that still shape the Middle East today. So what was this agreement? Why was it kept hidden? And were these decisions really about stability or about power and control? To understand that, we need to step into the final years of a collapsing empire. At the beginning of the 20th century, much of the Middle East was still under the control of the Ottoman Empire. It had ruled the region for centuries, connecting diverse cultures, religions, and communities under one political system. But by the time World War I began, the empire was weakening. Its authority was fading, and European powers were already thinking about what would happen if it fell. When the Ottoman Empire joined the war on the side of Germany, the Middle East became a key strategic zone. For Britain and France, this wasn't just another front in the war. It was an opportunity to reshape the region in their favor. Both countries had strong interests in the area. Britain was focused on protecting its route to India and securing access to important resources. Control over regions like Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf meant influence on trade and energy routes. France, meanwhile, had historical and cultural ties to parts of the Levant and wanted to maintain its presence and influence there. Even before the war was over, both powers began planning the future. Instead of waiting for the collapse of Ottoman rule, they chose to decide the outcome in advance. Quiet discussions began, maps were studied, interests were calculated, and eventually a secret understanding was reached. Two diplomats became central to this process, one representing Britain, the other France. Together, they drafted an agreement that would later be known as Sykes-Picot. It wasn't announced publicly, it wasn't debated, it was simply agreed upon. The document divided large parts of the Middle East into zones of influence. Some areas would be directly controlled, others indirectly influenced. France would have authority in regions that would later become Syria and Lebanon. Britain would dominate areas that would later form Iraq and extend influence toward Palestine. But the lines drawn on that map didn't follow the realities of the region. Communities were not considered. Ethnic groups were not consulted. Historical connections between regions were overlooked. The map was shaped by strategic interests, not by the people who lived there. And at the same time, something else was happening. British officials were communicating with Arab leaders, encouraging them to rise against the Ottoman rule. In these discussions, there were suggestions that independence would follow if the Ottomans were defeated. This created a powerful expectation that a new, independent Arab future was possible. So while one set of promises hinted at independence, another secret plan was already dividing the same land between foreign powers.
Brothers, the British have betrayed us!
These two directions
newspaper
were
confirms
bound to
it!
collide.
This is outrageous!
For
We
a
must
while,
act now!
the agreement
Patience!
remained
Our
hidden,
response must
but
be
in
united and wise.
1917, after political upheaval in Russia, secret diplomatic documents were made public. Among them was this agreement. Its exposure changed everything. For many in the Middle East, it confirmed fears that decisions about their future had been made without their involvement. It also revealed the gap between what had been promised and what was being planned. After the war ended, the Ottoman Empire collapsed, and the ideas outlined in the agreement began to take shape on the ground. Instead of immediate independence, a new system was introduced, the Mandate system. Under this system, Britain and France took administrative control of former Ottoman territories, officially to prepare them for self-rule. Britain took control of Iraq and Palestine. France governed Syria and Lebanon. New political boundaries were created, but these borders did not always reflect the region's complex reality. In many cases, they cut across communities or brought together groups with different identities under a single system.
Please, sir.
These new states
brother
were
is
not
waiting.
necessarily
Papers.
unstable from
We
the
have
beginning,
none. The border
but they
wasn't here
faced
last year.
challenges. Different communities had different expectations. Political systems were often influenced by external powers. Over time, tensions began to rise, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. As decades passed, independence movements grew stronger. Colonial influence weakened. But the structures created during this period remained. Borders stayed, political frameworks continued, and the effects of those early decisions became part of the region's long-term reality. Conflicts that emerged later were shaped by many factors: leadership decisions, economic conditions, regional rivalries, and global politics. It would be too simple to say that one agreement caused everything, but it would also be inaccurate to ignore its role. Because what Sykes-Picot represented was more than just a document. It reflected a way of thinking, one where powerful nations made decisions about other regions based on their own interests. That approach left a lasting mark. Even today, the name Sykes-Picot is often used as a symbol, not just of a historical agreement, but of external influence, artificial borders, and the long-term consequences of decisions made without local participation. When people try to understand the modern Middle East, its borders, its tensions, its political struggles, they often return to this moment, not because it explains everything, but because it helps explain how the framework was built. It marked a shift from empire to new states,
Sykes-Picot still
from one
defines our
system
region.
of rule to another,
Borders drawn
from
without our
old structures
consent.
to newly
Look,
drawn lines.
this article says the
and
same.
those lines,
A century
once
later,
drawn,
and nothing has
became
changed.
difficult to change. So when we ask about the real motives behind this agreement, the answer lies in strategy and timing. Britain wanted to secure its routes and strengthen its global position. France
This
wanted
map shows the
influence and a
outcomes, but not the full
lasting presence in
context.
key regions.
One agreement can't
Both were
explain this. It
thinking
was a
about
web
the
of
future,
factors.
but a
So the treaty
future
was one
shaped
piece
by
of a
their
larger
own
puzzle.
priorities. The goal was not necessarily to create balanced or unified nations. It was to divide influence in a way that benefited those making the decisions. And that is why the impact of this agreement didn't end with the war. It carried forward through independence movements, political changes, and regional conflicts that followed. It became part of a larger story about how modern states were formed and how external decisions can shape internal realities. The Middle East, as we see it today, was shaped by many moments, many choices, and many forces. But among them, this agreement stands out because it reminds us that sometimes the most powerful decisions aren't made on the battlefield, but in quiet rooms, far from the people whose lives they will eventually change.